So, uh, during the Protestant Reformation, we see a lot of changes beginning to take place militarily, um, um, religiously, a lot of different changes. And with the Age of Exploration, as well as the religious wars, all of that taking place, we start to see also changes politically speaking. So we're going to discuss absolutism, divine right, and constitutional monarchy. These are some terms I want you to be familiar with, so please look over those, make some flashcards. That way you have a very good understanding of what we're talking about if those terms are mentioned. In Western Europe, the efforts of French kings to maximize their power really exemplified the development of royal absolutism. Marie de Medici ruled as regent for her son, Louis XIII, and eventually took the Cardinal Richelieu as a counselor. In 1624, Richelieu became the chief minister. Ultimately, Richelieu became the power behind the throne, and his main goals were to elevate the French royal family and to elevate France into a powerful European position. He would use punishment or payment in any way he saw fit to elevate royal authority. Any noble opposing the king would either die or lose everything with the army at Richelieu's command. Some of the Huguenot leaders rebelled, and Richelieu took everything they gained from Henry IV except their religious liberties. To keep the nobility in check, Richelieu divided France into 30 administrative districts with an agent of the crown in charge called intendants. These intendants were from the middle class or from people who had recently gained noble titles. They were moved around frequently to keep them from sympathizing with the locals, and from all this, Richelieu was not popular with the people, and so most people did not cry when he died in 1642. And by his death, Richelieu ultimately accomplished his goals, but he alienated the people from their rulers. Louis XIII died a few months after Richelieu, and we see Louis XVI gaining the crown at the age of 5. When Louis was 23, he asserted himself as France's ruler, a representative of God. Like most monarchs, Louis saw his position as one divinely appointed. To increase his opulence, he began a series of public works projects to glorify himself, to make himself look good to his people as well as to outsiders. The pinnacle of this building project was the Palace of Versailles. The palace could hold 5,000 people and host 1,000 more visitors every day. The palace is so breathtaking that other European monarchs started trying to copy it. It took more than 40 years to build, and Louis finally moved there in 1682. He drew the nobility in, manipulating them to focus solely on him and on his favoritism. And so we see what Richelieu started as alienating the people. We see the Sun King, Louis the 16th, continuing this pattern. Now, all of this obviously cost quite a bit of money, but the king had a man by the name of Jean-Baptiste Colbert managing the crown's finances. Colbert did several things to boost the empire's budget and prestige. He instigated high tariffs. He subsidized exports and new industries. He built a navy, and he subjected all French-made products to specific regulations and supervision. So to give you an example, something that was highly prized among different European nations was French lace. French lace. This was something that everybody wanted, and in many ways they had to thank Colbert for that, because Colbert was very much a proponent of everything will meet certain regulations, certain standards, and by that we can cause some of our products to be seen as luxury products rather than just things coming out of the East, right? When Colbert died in 1683, he left France, monetarily speaking, in the black, right? And they were prospering, even through all of Louis's expenses. Sadly, Louis did many things after Colbert's death to reverse that forward momentum. Louis demanded religious conformity, and he used the military to enforce it. In 1680, I'm sorry for the cell phone ringing in the background. It'll stop momentarily. Okay, so Louis demanded religious conformity, and he used the military to enforce it. In 1685, he revoked the Edict of Nantes, which granted tolerance to the Huguenots. He destroyed Protestant churches, and he outlawed Protestantism altogether. Toward the end of his reign, he wanted more land, more glory, more money, and this spurred him on to fight 4 more wars, none of which were successful. The major European powers decided to form an alliance against France. The alliance stopped Louis's attempt at gaining land. The country, once again, was impoverished, and many talked of revolting. When Louis died, he left the legacy of court glamour, of intrigue, of lavish spending, and many monarchs sadly tried to emulate him. He wound up reigning for 72 years, and few of his subjects were sad at his death. That was a very quick rundown of absolutism, and now we're going to have a very quick rundown of divine right and constitutionalism. And for that, we're going to go across the channel, and we are going to look at England. Many Protestants began to experience unhappiness with the Church of England. Many said the Anglican Church should be purified of anything similar to Catholic practices, and any practice that seemed to lack a biblical precedence. Some of the more zealous Protestants calling for this purification were called Puritans, and this was meant more so as a derogatory term. He sort of spat this word out, Puritans. Oh, he's a Puritan. It's not necessarily a good thing. When Queen Elizabeth died without children, the throne moved from the Tudor dynasty to the Stuarts. James I of Scotland, Elizabeth's cousin, became king, and he favored Anglicanism, which irritated Calvinists, Puritans, and Catholics, with all the different laws he came up with. In 1605, a group of Catholics plotted to blow up Parliament. The gunpowder plot ultimately failed to overthrow the government because it didn't go through. The members of the conspiracy were all executed because somebody sent a letter to his cousin saying, hey, don't be in Parliament on this particular day. Remember, the 5th of November, don't be there then. Well, why not? Because I think we're going to blow it up. So the gunpowder plot never went through. However, that phrase, remember, the 5th of November, it's a phrase used to remind the monarchy that the people will only put up with so much. Now, James I, once again, very big proponent of divine right. He once stated that kings have power of life and earth. They are judges over all their subjects and in all causes, and yet accountable to none but God. So you guys ain't got nothing on me. No matter what I do, I answer only to God. That was his position. Charles the First, James's son, inherited the throne upon James's death, and he felt the same way about divine right, as well as about Parliament, which he only called as needed. Whenever he needed money, basically, he called Parliament, and then would frequently, but very quickly disband them. Charles began to persecute the Puritans because he saw them as being disloyal. There was a rise in Puritans fleeing to North America, settling the colony of Plymouth in order to avoid the very Anglican colony of Jamestown. In 1640, the Scots invaded and Charles called Parliament. Why? Because he needs money. He needs money, and he also needs an army. The Parliament was able to convince him to not disband without the members' consent. So this Parliament wound up lasting for 13 years. Eventually, it did gain some measure of power and instituted a few reforms, as well as protections for Anglicans and for Puritans. As relations between Parliament and the king deteriorated, however, battle lines were drawn, and in 1642 the English Civil War erupted. Parliament's forces were called Roundheads for many reasons, haircuts, religious conviction being the main two. The king's forces were called Cavaliers and Royalists. Oliver Cromwell led the parliamentary forces, and he took charge of training the men, calling it the New Model Army. And this is rather significant because Oliver Cromwell sort of sets the precedent for army training, as it were. In 1646, Charles surrendered to the Scots, thinking that they might protect him, but they didn't. They gave Charles to Parliament for back military pay. In 1648, fighting broke out again, with Charles encouraging people to try to free him. The Roundheads ultimately squashed this rebellion, and they called for the king to be placed on trial. When his trial came, he was tried as a king, not as a citizen, and he was found guilty of treason. On January 30th, 1649, Charles was executed. A commonwealth was established for 11 years. Parliament had trouble uniting the kingdom and fulfilling its promises to the people. So in 1653, Oliver Cromwell became Lord Protector of England. He was a very pious Puritan, and he tried to abolish certain forms of entertainment that he saw as immoral, like horse racing or rooster fighting, or the theater. The people were not happy with him either. He's taking away all of their fun, right? So he disbanded Parliament, just like the kings who came before him. And no matter what was said about him, we do technically see him as a rather effective ruler until his death. When he died, now this is interesting, when he died, his son Richard took over. Now what does that sound like? Does that sound like a like a free, commonwealth? No. Sounds more like a monarchy, right? Well, his son Richard did not have the same success as his father. So Parliament gained control once again. In 1660, the monarchy was restored. Charles II had been living in exile in Holland when he returned. And when he returned, the people started partying. Like, it was like, yay! Now we don't have that very strict guy in office anymore. Basically, it really seemed like England was not meant to be without a king. That stated, Charles II had the same problems as his father and Cromwell, most of them revolving around money. To get around the new laws established by Parliament to limit the king's authority, Charles tried exerting more control and authority over the colonies. So that's going to lead to some problems, right? Charles was also sympathetic to Catholics, which was very disturbing for Parliament. When Charles died, his Catholic brother James became king. And this was something that Parliament simply could not have. England had been a Protestant nation for quite some time, and they were not about to return to what they called popery, right? We're not going back to popery. So Parliament then sent for William of Orange, son-in-law to James. He married James' Protestant daughter. William came from the Netherlands, and James left for France, where he spent the rest of his life. I think he probably saw the writing on the wall and was like, yeah, no, not a fight with fighting. Upon his entry, Parliament needed to legalize William's rule. So they passed a Bill of Rights in 1689, which stated that kings were subject to the law of the land, thus creating a constitutional monarchy. And ultimately, the Glorious Revolution was mostly bloodless. And it does establish firmly constitutionalism. A couple of conclusions I want you to be sort of wrap your mind around. I apologize, I have the 14th there, 16th. Louis XVI served as the model for all those who aimed to increase the power of the central state. 17th century states wanted certain things. They wanted more men for the military. Why? Because they want more land. Why they want more land? Because they want more money, they want more power, right? Hence the age of exploration. They're going to look, for more. Higher taxes. And they also want more control over foreign trade, religious dissent. They're coming out of that century of religious wars. They've got to have control over it, as well as society's unwanted. The English Civil War opened the way for new demands for political participation. So, hey, we the people want a voice. In the 18th century, new levels of economic growth and the appearance of new social groups would exert pressures on the European state system, which is, once again, going to give rise to further revolutionary feelings.